Happy Valentine's Day from the Podcast Daily. Since Bill Landis and me, Austin Ward, love you all so much, we figure it's time to start some spring position previews. Also, it's because I checked the calendar and it's the middle of the week, it's the middle of the month, and we're well over halfway since the end of the Cotton Bowl and the start of spring practice. Like, we were running out of time, Bill, before we actually got into this preview series that we do every year.
Yeah, you had mentioned something about doing the previews, I think on Tuesdays daily, and I thought to myself, like, we have plenty of time. And then I also looked at the calendar. I was like, no, we have like 2 weeks worth of shows to get 9 position previews in if we want to be done by that Monday before spring practice is starting. So yeah, we better start it today because we are running out of time.
How did that happen? I don't understand. It feels like yesterday we were just in Dallas or Arlington or wherever, somewhere in Texas, and watching a pretty weird game, and now here we are, and it's inside of 3 weeks until the start of spring ball.
It's pretty crazy. I think we were just distracted by everything that happened with Ohio State's offseason that we just lost track of time, clearly. Because I think I might have said on yesterday's show too that it was January, and it's not. It's February. Not only is it February, it's the middle of February. So yeah, I'll just chalk it up to too much happening with Ohio State. All this good news distracted us from the calendar.
And if you need a reminder, it's Valentine's Day. Go out and grab some gifts while you're listening to Bill Landis and I talk about the Ohio State cornerbacks. It's too obvious to start on the offensive side for us, so that's normally what we do, but we're flipping it for 2024, and we're going to start with a group that last summer Bill predicted was going to be really freaking good, and turns out he was right.
I was not alone in that. I mean, I'll take all the credit for it if you'd like to give it to me, but I don't think I was alone in believing that Ohio State's cornerback room was about to turn a corner, take a dramatic step forward, however you want to put it. Because I kind of just bought what the guys were selling us last year, like Denzel Burke and Tim Walton and Davis and Igbinosun when he finally got here before spring practice. Like, they were all super confident that last year was going to be the year that they kind of got back to handling their business the way that we expect Ohio State's cornerbacks to. And they definitely backed it up. Like, they were, probably, I don't know if they were the best corner group in the country last year, but they were certainly in the conversation, and they're bringing everybody back. So I think they could be the best corner group in the country this year. But the conversation about the room is not only about the top. Like, there's some really exciting young players here. And as we discussed before, Tim Walton's recruiting really well. So I don't know how you are anything other than incredibly excited about the cornerback position, both for the present and the future at the moment, because it's pretty freaking good.
It is, I think, a little bit interesting that the way we previewed or projected for Ohio State's cornerback group going into last season was, well, here's these 3 guys, and it's going to be a 3-man rotation. And, Jordan Hancock and Denzel Burke are the stars there at corner. And then you get to add Davis and Igbinosun in there. At least that's the way I viewed it, as the 3rd man into that group. And that's not the way it played out, because Jordan Hancock was such a natural fit at nickel that's where by the middle of the season he really had to be full-time for Ohio State. Now, like, 2024 is different. Like, with all those 3 guys back, what Jordan Hancock can do there. Denzel Burke, he's got to be in that 2,000 rep plus club that he's not going to need to do a whole lot of work in March and April. And Davis and Igbinosun is close to that part. I'm going to talk about him a little bit more later on. I think he's one of the more intriguing guys in this mix here for Ohio State, like even factoring in Jermaine Matthews or the incoming freshmen, the early enrollees. But like, we almost know what's going to happen here. This might be too easy to look at for the first position group.
Yeah, well, we like to tee ourselves up here and not make it the most difficult it could be. Denzel Burke has played 1,898 defensive snaps according to Pro Football Focus. So do you round up? Is that how that works? You get the round up? Okay, yep. So I guess he is in the 2,000 rep club. We'll give him that. He's going to be in his 4th year as a starting player, so he deserves a spring where he can sip Mai Tais and just ride the stationary bike and have a nice time. I forget what you asked me. Because I was just seems the reps. Right. It's easy. Yeah. It's easy. Yeah. No, it is, right. But that should create a tremendous amount of comfort, I think, for Ohio State fans and for Jim Knowles as well. And like that, it's a unique year where I think you can say that about a lot of areas on this defense because they're bringing everybody back. And, we'll talk about safety eventually. And that's a really intriguing position too. But this is probably the position on the roster that I feel best about. Like, right? Is that clear? Like, if we were ranking them with like stability, talent, expectations for next season, would you have corners number one?
Yeah, and that's not meant as a slight in any way to wide receiver, which I think it's the conversation either way. We had it a couple of weeks like, who's the best recruiter right now? Tim Walton or Brian Hartline? Which group is the best stock? That's going to go hand in hand with who's recruiting the best. Like, we've got the most veteran experience coming back, though. That's probably where the scales are tilted towards defense and tilted toward cornerback, specifically because of Denzel Burke, because of the production for Davis and Igbinosun, because if we're lumping that nickel spot in at corner, which you could make a case either way, it's probably more of a safety, but Jordan Hancock brought corner skills to it. You know what you have with all three of those guys, plus Jermaine Matthews getting that work in year one as a true freshman. Like, that's not quite the same as what Ohio State has at wide receiver. So, high end potential, the same for both, but the veteran production, I think, gives them the edge. And I think that's got to be a reason for Ohio State in the Woody and for the fan base to be like incredibly excited about what that means for the defense as a whole.
Yeah, I know. I agree, and I would think I would include Jordan Hancock in the cornerback conversation. I think he probably still fancies himself a cornerback, even though I guess technically the nickel is a safety in Jim Knowles' scheme. It's semantics, I suppose. I think it's a corner, or I think he is a corner. Excuse me, who plays in the slot, but just happens to have a safety skill set. We can count them twice if you want. We can use them to bolster the corners, and we can use them to bolster the safeties. I am a little curious about Jordan Hancock this spring, like, and well, I'm not trying to have every position conversation at the moment, but there's like some moving parts here, like centered around Sonny Styles and stuff. Like, what exactly are they going to do? I'm curious how much Jordan Hancock might play on the outside, especially in the spring. Like, if we think Denzel Burke might be a guy who gets the veteran star treatment, and he probably should, then do you use that time to play Jermaine Matthews and the young guys a lot, or do you let Jordan Hancock have a spring where he's playing a lot of corner, even if maybe you don't think he's going to play a ton of corner in the fall? I'm looking at it, he played 90 corner snaps last year, according to PFF. He played 401 in the slot, so the vast majority of his snaps last year were still in the slot. But clearly he's a guy that can play outside. I think in the NFL, it's fair to view him either as a corner or a nickel, and that versatility will help him. But I do kind of wonder if the spring might be a time for him to play a lot of corner, even like similar maybe to what like Marvin playing in the slot last year. It's just like, it's spring ball. It's something to do. It's good skills for him to learn, even if it's not something you're going to tap into a whole lot in the fall.
Well, if this is also a world where Sonny Styles is not going to be in any kind of timeshare, which we don't know if that's going to be the case or not. If he is trending towards linebacker and you want to develop some depth there at nickel, like Jordan Hancock probably doesn't need a ton of work there. That would be a good opportunity. I don't know if Jordan Hancock needs a lot of reps anywhere, but somebody else is going to have to play in that nickel spot. And I think, Denzel Burke has certainly earned the right to relax a little bit in the spring. And I don't think Jordan Hancock is that far removed from that either. And he's also, I think sometimes we view him as like, he's played prominently just for 1 year. And it's like, well, he must be much younger than he is. And it's year 4 because the injuries really derailed the first 2 years. So from a veteran perspective, from understanding the defense, what Ohio State wants him to do, what he needs to do, I don't know that he's got to do it, whether that's outside corner or at nickel, that he's got to work a lot. And that puts Ohio State in a position where they can really develop depth at all 3 spots if they want, and they probably will. But that's also why I think like Davis and Igbinosun isn't quite in that category. So it's human nature to jump right to the new guys. And for me, I'm like more intrigued by what year 3 in college football looks like for Davis and Igbinosun. And this will sound like nitpicking and criticism, and I don't mean it that way at all. If there's somebody who could take a leap here and really elevate Ohio State as a whole, I think you have to look at Davis and Igbinosun. I love the fact that he plays with that physicality and with his hands and is not afraid to mix it up. But there is a part that I mentioned in the middle of last season, and I checked to make sure He wound up getting called for 6 penalties, which is twice as
Mhm.
many as anybody else on Ohio State's defense. And this other part of this is because Denzel Burke is on the other side and Davison Igbinosun gets targeted so much more, it puts both the penalties and the number of receptions allowed and then the touchdowns, of which he gave up. He was PFF credited him for 5, which somebody's got to do it. And I'm not viewing that as like Davison Igbinosun is not good, but these are just some of the numbers that are out there. Ohio State gave up 9 touchdowns through the air throughout the course of the season, and 5 were on Davison Igbinosun. Factor that in with the penalties and the number of times that he's probably going to get targeted again. I just wonder what another year of football underneath, on his resume, more fundamental development, technical development, physical development, what that means for him and how that translates into a third season.
They're all really good points, and I don't disagree with them. I think like I don't want to call Davison Igbinosun like the weak link, but like someone has to be worse than Denzel Burke, and Davison Igbinosun had a little worse off season than Denzel Burke did, and I think you and I agree that Davison appears to have a really high ceiling, and I don't think he's there quite yet. Much of his season was really good, but the penalties definitely stuck out. And when they got him from Ole Miss, like I saw a guy that looked pretty comfortable in space and like playing as like a zone off corner, I think is pretty good. But I would almost like go into the spring and say, like, you're doing nothing but playing press man for 15 practices. And then we'll just keep throwing the receivers at you, and that's your spring. And then we'll see how you come out of that. Because I do think that's where he can stand to improve his game a little bit. And it's not a matter of like do this or else Ohio State's corner play is not going to be good enough. Like I think what they have right now is certainly good enough, and Davison Igbinosun is probably going to get drafted, I don't know, fairly high after next season based off his measurables alone, and he's been a productive player. But he can definitely take a little bit of a step forward. I'd like to see him get a little more kind of like ball production too, in terms of like interceptions, pass deflections. I thought we saw Denzel Burke take a nice jump in that area last year, not necessarily in interceptions, but at least like getting his hands on the football. And Davison Igbinosun, like with as long as he is, can certainly do that. So that's what's exciting about the spring. It's like the baseline level of competency and talent in this group is like extraordinary, but probably with everybody, like Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock included, I don't think you'd say any of them are like quite a finished product, so that there's even like a little bit of a percentage, and maybe in Davison's situation, a little greater percentage than Denzel Burke at least. There's room for improvement for all three, which is like awesome. Like the idea that group can be possibly better than it was last year is a little scary to me.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon to see growing pains that show up in some year two, and that's probably even too strong for it. I mean, he had being in that spot opposite a lockdown All-American caliber cornerback means you're going to see a lot of work, and your numbers are not going to be as good as the other guy. Like that's natural, and so is sometimes having to work through, the physical technical growth. Like Denzel's second year, we all know, was not what he envisioned. Now, some of that was injury related, or maybe even a lot of it was injury related. But the growth process doesn't always have to be straightforward, and every day is going to be better than the one before, or every year is going to be better than the one before. And the fact that Davison Igbinosun played at that level while maybe still trying to learn some things, and one of them being a new defense, a new place to go to school, a new place to live, a lot of new things for Davison Igbinosun. All of that is encouraging. I only bring it up as a part to put in context. It doesn't mean that I think Jermaine Matthews is going out there and stealing a starting job in the spring, although he's certainly shown very high level ability, and it wouldn't be impossible to envision him eating into some of the reps for both Davison or Denzel to get to that 3-man rotation that we've seen Ohio State deploy in the past. But this is a situation that I think is good for Ohio State, that you don't have to skip automatically to, hey, can these freshmen, can Bryce West or Aaron Scott, and we're going to be watching them plenty for sure to see how they compete now that they're early enrollees and they're on campus and they get March and April. Like that, a returning guy is well worth watching. The development speaks to the depth and I think the expectations that I have for Ohio State at cornerback. It isn't a negative in my mind.
No, I don't think it is either. And you said the word compete there. I think it's it's a competitive environment for everybody in the room. And maybe you wouldn't necessarily think that when you do have a couple, basically all the returning starting spots accounted for. But like when you are Davis and Igbinosun and you have a little bit of you have some areas where you can grow, and maybe you're Jordan Hancock and you want to test your skills on the outside more than anything else. You have Jermaine Matthews has been chomping at the bit since he got here to get onto the field and like force his way into some meaningful moments last year, and I thought performed well. And then I think all three of the freshmen are early enrolled. Aaron Scott, Bryce West, Miles Lockhart, so they're all here. Lorenzo Styles is a really interesting player too, who's now got a year playing cornerback in the defense and a year in the system. And then like Calvin Simpson Hunt, like maybe take the freshman out of it. Like everyone else in that room, like I think can play. Like, and I'm not saying they're all going to be stars if you throw them on the field tomorrow, but I think all of them have talent, right? There was a time not that long ago where you looked at the cornerback room and you thought to yourself, like, there's like two guys here that I think are Ohio State caliber, and the rest of the room is leaving a little something to be desired. Now they have 9 in the room, if you include Jordan Hancock as the nickel, and I think all of them are Ohio State caliber. So like that is a really dramatic turnaround that should create maybe in an odd way, like maybe the most competitive environment on the roster, even in a world where there's not really a starting job up for grabs.
Yeah, and that means you got to figure out the best way to develop them throughout spring, or even the best position, which for someone like Lorenzo Styles, like maybe that is someone who fits in the profile of take some of Jordan Hancock's work at nickel. I don't know. I'm purely spitballing on that part, but like having to move over from that to that spot from wide receiver, and a lot of people talked about the edge that he plays with, the work ethic that he has, and like well, he can do it. And I don't dismiss that at all, knowing the Styles family and everybody else, the legacy there with his father and the way that his brother attacks things. Like I would never count him out, but that means that he has to catch up with multiple NFL draft picks to find playing time, and that may be easier for him to do with his skill set at nickel than purely going one-on-one outside with top flight wide receivers. That's again a credit to him that we can even have this conversation with 1 year of playing cornerback under his belt. He's going to help on special teams, but maybe that's a spot where you look at March and April and be like, all right, who are the other options at nickel, and why would Lorenzo potentially fit there?
Yeah, Berm and I had a conversation on a show, I think when maybe you were in Disney, about like guys on the roster who had not been talking about a whole lot that were just kind of interested in going in the spring. And I said Lorenzo Styles for exactly those reasons. And it's nothing more than curiosity. Like we haven't talked with Tim Walton about where Lorenzo might fit in. Haven't talked to Matt Guerreri since he's been hired to know what he thinks about it. But I'm just going off pure like body type. Like it seems like you want a bigger cornerback at that position, or like someone with decent length anyway. It used to be like you would kind of try to match the 5'8" receiver that's in the slot with your slot corner, and now you do kind of want a safety type there, at least in this defense. So Lorenzo looks like he could do that. And when I mentioned that, Berm said Aaron Scott is a guy that has kind of the measurables you might look at there too. And especially for young guys, like I don't know, maybe it makes more sense to start them on the outside and then see if they can play inside. But if you're not really expecting that they're going to play a whole lot as true freshmen, maybe it's worth just throwing an Aaron Scott out there at nickel in the spring and maybe letting them take some lumps to see what comes out of that, because you are going to have to fill that spot eventually in the 2025 season. And there's not an heir apparent to Jordan Hancock. That's like that's not the one thing, but it's one of the things when you like try to project down the road, like who exactly is that going to be? I don't really know the answer to that. But there's so much depth in the secondary and especially in the cornerback room that I don't know. It's like try everybody who's not Denzel Burke there, I guess, and see what happens.
I mean, maybe Denzel wants just a little challenge to do something different throughout spring ball. Who knows? They can just flip roles. I don't know.
He was tackling pretty well last year. He looked to fly downfield and maybe lose his helmet a time or two, so maybe he could do it.
Yeah, he was sticking his face in there. Again, way more than he did as a sophomore. That's part of growth, development, maturity, physicality, all that stuff. We've seen that come along for Ohio State there in the secondary and at quarterback specifically. Anything else you think, Bill, that you have on your mind heading into spring ball, which is 3 weeks away?
Yeah, I'm excited to watch, and I'm anticipating that we're going to get to watch as much spring practice as we did last year, which was, I think it ended up being like 4 or 5 full practices if you include the spring game.
Yep.
And for the last few years, when the corners and receivers went at it, it's like you knew who was going to win. And now I think I know who's going to win, and I think it's going to be the corners. and I'm excited to watch like a different dynamic there play out and see, like, it's going to make the corners better, but I think it might make a lot of these young receivers better too, having this talent line up across from them.
Yeah, and that's a big deal because again, when we're talking about like which one's the better unit, having them go head to head in practice is certainly an advantage. And I think when you're bringing along some younger wide receivers, which that's the situation that Ohio State finds itself in when you have Marvin Harrison Jr. going to the NFL draft and Julian Fleming transferring out, and you're reloading there. Like obviously, there's a lot of talent, but they're going to get true tests, even if that's the number twos and Jermaine Matthews is lining up against you. That's somebody who's locked up Big Ten receivers already in his career.
Yeah, he's not. He will be unfazed by whoever you throw out there. He was unfazed last year, probably even when Marvin Harrison Jr. was lined up across from him. But we know for sure after seeing him play in real games that nothing that gets thrown his way in spring practice will be too daunting for Jermaine Matthews.
No, he's. I believe the X-rays confirmed he has that dog in him.
He does. Yeah,
and that seems to be the case from all of them. Like the BIA thing is 2 years ago. That was too much. You can't reclaim that. You can't call them that. But they're well on their way. Last year was a big step towards that. They're pretty darn close if they didn't get there, and the makings are there. You can tell. I think that's the part when we've mentioned Denzel Burke being the spokesman and the truth teller for Ohio State's defense, like how important that is to him, because he knows what that looks like and what the expectation is. Those guys, even when they leave, when you're talking about Jeff Okudah or Sean Wade, or going back further with Denzel Ward and Garyon Conley. I mean, they're texting each other, getting the group text, and they expect like first round draft picks across the board, and they're getting back to that level. They were not there the last couple of years, and that showed.
Yeah, no, and it's a credit to Tim Walton and Denzel Burke too, I think, for like helping elevate that room again. He was in a tough spot 2 years ago as a true freshman, like as the guy who was playing the best and sort of having to be like the maybe not the vocal leader of the room, but at least like with the way that he was playing, like he was kind of the number one guy in that room. And it's good to see him now going into his fourth year, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Like no doubt about it, he's the number one guy in that room at a time when he should be. But also, like everyone else, I think in the room has responded to him in a really positive way and has upped their level of play too. So it looks exactly how you want it to look, both in terms of who's in the room now and obviously with what's happening in recruiting. I feel pretty comfortable saying that they have earned back that moniker, and I think there's no reason to doubt that they can't carry it forward after this year.
Well, it's always earned. It's never given. That's right. That's the way it works. But you can give plenty of gifts to your Valentine out there. We thank you for starting off your Valentine's Day with us on the podcast daily. We love you all very much, and we're now ready to continue giving position previews because we're running out of time otherwise. So started with the cornerbacks. We'll probably maybe dip into more in the secondary later on this week. But we appreciate you all joining us and hanging out with Bill and me. We'll talk to you later. Have a great Valentine's Day.